Keisha, welcome and welcome back. We are on our next reading in the Aquarian. I believe it's chapters 92 and 93. So let us go ahead and begin by closing our eyes and centering. Just taking a deep breath in and out. Even though it seems like we're just jumping right in, we're really just trying to get to that good feeling place. So just let it all out. And with each breath, as you become more and more aware of your body in this present moment, in this time and space, we begin to release the cares and concerns that have us pulled in different directions. Release all the busyness of the day. Anything that we have planned, know that we will get to it in divine timing and divine order. There is no hurry and there is no rush in spirit. Let's gently begin to center ourselves. Feeling your power come back to you. Feel the hard exterior softening. And when you're ready, see a column of white light coming down over you and begin to breathe in that light. Feel the light filling you, making you all the way whole. And now let's lift up higher, lifting up in that column of light higher and higher, lifting up into our space of peace, of oneness, of knowing. Breathe in how familiar it is, how comforting. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Here we are. Ooh, we have lots of notes, lots of things to discuss today. Chapter 92 and 93. The Christians at a feast at Lazarus' home. A fire rages in the town. Jesus rescues a child from the flames and stays the fire by the word. He gives a practical lesson on how to redeem a drunken man. The Christians go through a field of ripe wheat, and the disciples eat of the wheat. Jesus exonerates them. The Christians return to Capernaum. Jesus heals a withered hand on the Sabbath and defends his deed. Now, Lazarus was at the feast, and Jesus and the 12 went with him to his home in Bethany. And Lazarus and his sisters made a feast for Jesus and the 12, and Ruth and Asher came from Jericho, for Asher was no longer hostile to the Christ. Remember Asher, Ruth came to Jesus with, talking to Jesus about the problems in their marriage, and Christ gives instruction on how to resolve them. And while the guests sat at the board, behold, a cry, "The village is afire!" And all rushed out into the streets, and lo, the homes of many neighbors were in flames. And in an upper room an infant lay asleep, and none could pass the flames to save. The mother, wild with grief, was calling on the men to save her child. Then, with a voice that made the spirits of the fire pale and tremble, Jesus said, "Peace, peace, be still." And then he walked through the smoke and flame, climbed up the failing stair, and in a moment came again. And in his arms he brought the child. And not a trace of fire was on himself, his raiment, or the child. Then Jesus raised his hand, rebuked the spirits of the fire, commanding them to cease their awful work and be at rest. And then, as the waters of the sea were all at once poured into the flames, the fire ceased to burn. And when the fury of the fire was spent and the multitudes were wild to see the man who could control the fire, Jesus said, "Man was not made for fire, but fire was made for man." When man comes to himself and comprehends the fact that he is Son of God, and knows that in himself lie all the powers of God, he is a mastermind, and all the elements will hear his voice and gladly do his will. Two sturdy asses behind the will of man, their names are fear and unbelief. When these are caught and turned aside, the will of man will know no bounds. Then man has but to speak, and it is done. And then the guests returned and sat about the board. A little child came in and stood by Jesus' side. She laid her hand on Jesus' arm and said, Please, Master Jesus, hear. My father is a drunken man. My mother toils from morn till night, and when she brings her wages home, my father snatches them away and squanders every cent for drink. And mother and us little ones are hungry all night. Please, Master Jesus, come with me and touch my father's heart. He is so good and kind when he is just himself. I know it is the wine that makes another man of him. And Jesus went out to the child and found the wretched home. He spoke in kindness to the mother and the little ones. And then upon a bed of straw he found the drunken man. He took him by the hand and raised him up and said, My brother man, made in the image of God our Father, will you arise and come with me? Your neighbors are in sore distress. They have lost all they had in this fierce fire, and men must build their homes again, and you and I must lead the way. And then the man arose, and the two went arm in arm to view the wrecks. They heard the mothers and saw the children crying in the streets. They saw their wretchedness. And Jesus said, My friend, here is a work for you to do. Just lead the way in helpfulness. I'm sure the men of Bethany will furnish you with the means and the help. The spark of hope that had so long been smoldering in the man was fanned into a flame. He threw his ragged coat aside. He was himself again. And then he called for help, not for himself, but for the homeless ones, and everybody helped. The ruined homes were built again. And then he saw his own poor wretched den. His heart was stirred into its depths. The pride of manhood filled the soul, he said. This wretched den shall be a home. He worked as if he had never wrought before, and everybody helped. And in a little while the den became a home indeed. The flowers of love bloomed everywhere. The mother and the little ones were filled with joy. The father never drank again. A man was saved, and no one ever said a word about neglect nor drunkenness, nor urged him to reform. Another Sabbath day had come, and Jesus and the 12 walked through the field of ripened wheat. And they were hungry, and they took their heads of wheat, and in their hands threshed out the grain and ate. Among the men who followed them were Pharisees of the strictest sect, and when they saw that the 12 threshed out the wheat and ate, they said to Jesus, Sir, why did the 12 do that which is not lawful on the Sabbath day? And Jesus said, Have you not heard that David, when he and those who followed him had need of food, how when he went to the house of God and from the table of the holy place took of the presence bread and ate and gave to those who followed him? I tell you, men, the needs of man are higher than the law of rights. And in our sacred books we read how priests profane the Sabbath day in many ways while they are serving in the holy place, and still they are free from guilt. The Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made to fit the Sabbath day. The man is son of God, and under the eternal light of right, which is the highest law, he may annul the statute laws. The law of sacrifice is but the law of man, and in our law we read that God desires mercy first, and mercy stands above all statute laws. The Son of Man is Lord of every law. Did not a prophet sum the duties of the man when in the book he wrote, In mercy follow justice, and walk humbly with your God? Then Jesus and the 12 returned to Galilee, and on the day before the Sabbath day, they reached the home of Jesus in Capernaum. And on the Sabbath day they went up to the synagogue. The multitudes were there, and Jesus taught. Among the worshippers was one man, a man who had a withered hand. The scribes and Pharisees observed that Jesus saw the man, and they said, What will he do? Will he attempt to heal on the Sabbath day? And Jesus knew their thoughts, and he called to the man who had the withered hand and said, Arise, stand forth before these men. And Jesus said, You scribes and Pharisees, speak out and answer me. Is it a crime to save a life upon the Sabbath day? If you had sheep and one fell into a pit upon the Sabbath day, would you do wrong to take it out? Or would it please your God to let it suffer in the mire until another day? But his accusers held their peace. And then he said to them, Are sheep of greater value than a man? The law of God is written on the rock of right, and justice wrote the law, and mercy was the pen. And then he said, Man, arise with your hand and stretch it forth. He raised his hand, and it was restored. The Pharisees were filled with rage. They called in secret council the Herodians, and they began to plot and plan how they might bring about his death. They were afraid to publicly accuse because the multitude stood forth in his defense. And Jesus and the 12 went down and walked beside the sea, and many people followed them. Right. So like I said, lots of little notes today. I guess that first one, going back to Ruth and Asher, if you don't recall, this was back in chapter 77. And, like I said, Ruth was complaining of her marital troubles, right? And Jesus says to her, you're partly to blame because you saw that the message wasn't being received, but yet you persisted in talking about it with Asher. And so what Jesus counseled her was to keep quiet about her beliefs, though living them on the daily basis. And that as she was patient, in time, Asher would see the light. And obviously that's what happened, because now when Ruth and Asher come, Asher is much more composed and he's calm and no longer hostile, as it said. Oh, yes. Okay. When man comes to himself, he comprehends the fact that he is son of God and knows that in himself lie all the powers of God. He has a mastermind, and all the elements will hear his voice and gladly do his will. This is Jesus responding to the people where they're wondering, how is it that he's able to quell the fire? He's reminding them that if you remember that you are child of God, then you are heir to that kingdom and have access to all of that knowledge, wisdom, and ability. And so it's just a matter of being aware of your relationship to your parent, Father, Mother, God, and expressing those traits accordingly. I mean, it makes sense that we would be able to do that which our parents do if, we come from them. But what keeps us from seeing that and from being able to do is the two asses, the stubbornness of fear and unbelief. As those two persist, we fall into the trap of believing that only this one special person over here could do it, but I couldn't do it. That's not for me. When that's not the truth. We're all children of God, and so we are all heir to that kingdom. Then we move on. Yes. Okay. So Jesus gives the drunken man an identity, right? By telling him, "Hi, brother. You were made in the image of God. I see the truth in you. And so will you get up and come with me?" And then he says, everyone has lost all their homes in the fierce fire. Men must build their homes again. And you and I must lead the way. So Jesus is not only inclusive, but, he and the man are equals. And he's letting them know that, right? Just because he's a drunkard doesn't mean that he's not worth that he doesn't have worth. And you and I are one and the same. And so Jesus greets him as such, as equals. And I love that he says, you and I must lead the way, because no matter our seeming state, we each have something to contribute. And I think we lose sight of that, thinking that we have to have gone through certain tasks or mastered certain things before we're able to be of service in some way. And no, we are of service when we show up and do what is immediately in front of us and what is called to do that we can do. So, where are we now? Oh yeah, 28. A man was saved, and no one ever said a word about neglect or drunkenness, nor urged him to reform. So this is the lesson on maintaining our healing. It's a very simple one, but it is, I think, difficult to execute. Simple but not easy. We're familiar with that concept, right? So just follow me as I go through how this works. Your words are vibration, and given enough energy over time, they are going to manifest in material form, whether it's in disease or distress, right? And that's where we're going to experience, they're going to make themselves manifest in the material conditions of our world, the things that we, experience, whether in our bodies, in our relationships, or business affairs and other concerns. And once things get bad enough, right, we seek a healing. And we do that by putting our eye forward and looking ahead to the life we want to be living. And then we give that our attention and we act in that direction, right? And so in that way, we're looking to prepare a better future. So if the moment now is what sets up the future scenarios, by virtue of the fact that we were concentrating and focused on being good, feeling good, living a right and perfect life, that positive energy is what we're experiencing in the moment that sets up the next one. And so we need to speak only in the vibrations of the healed state, right? Not in comparison or reference to the past where, we were diseased and distressed. So if we reference where we are now, which is whole and healthy, and leave behind those negative states, then we are setting up that future state where we are happy, healthy, and whole, and that's how we maintain it. So there's no need to talk of the negativity that's past. We simply take the good that we see and praise it and keep it moving. Right? So yeah, that's how we maintain our healing. That's how we maintain being in the flow of all things good. Oh, yes. 93:7. I tell you, men, the needs of man are higher than the law of rights. So the law of rights were established to maintain order and control, over the people, right? But our needs as people are more important than that which would try to control us for their own benefit and profit, which is kind of, not unlike the conversation we're having in society now about, excessive corporate greed and political overreach. The needs of the people, like our needs as basic human right, are being defended in these arguments against the corruption in our political system and the excess of corporate greed. I like how when we get to so the next verse was 93:8, and in our sacred books we read how priests profane the Sabbath in many ways. I find it interesting that we always have the sacred and profane together. Sacred and profane always come together in so much of the reading that I do. And he again reminds us that the Sabbath was made for man, not the man for the Sabbath, which is similar to what he said previously about fire was made for man, not man for fire. So when we recognize our relationship to God as child of God, then those smaller aspects that in our current state we think are looming and large become focused in their right place, and we have mastery over them, or have the ability to master them. It's a lesson in perception, right? In right relationship. And I think, there's one more. This one's for my lawyers out there. The law of God is written on the rock of right. Justice wrote the law, and mercy was the pen. I just think there's so much beauty and poetry in that. So I think we'll end it there. Next week is Start Something Special. We start with the Sermon on the Mount, so definitely stay tuned and be on the lookout for that. As always, it's my pleasure. I look forward to you having a great week. I look forward to me having a fantastic week. And we'll come back next Sunday and listen and see what's up. I love you in the meantime. Bye.